back to MG Midget, Birth of a Race Car, capturing the journey to the 2022 Speed Series from Car Restoration. In this episode we're going to have a look at the rear axle refurbishment. Got the axle on the bench and started cleaning it up, so I've taken all the brake assembly out. This is not in a good way but maybe recoverable because the pin is still intact. It's still all in the right place, so I'm going to just tidy that up. I think that's part of the plan. The differential is going to have to come off and put a new gasket around here. All of this needs really cleaning up and degreasing. Moving along, this is probably the biggest area of concern. We've got some all thread here that's been bodged through. This has been fabricated up and has since all rotten through, so I'm going to have to take this off, take it back to the axle, and you can buy a little trunnion kit here that you weld back onto the axle casing, so that's what I'm going to do. Obviously I've got new U-bolts and plates and bushes and everything else, so all of that will go. And this end, like the other, taking all the brakes off. Next task is going to be to undo these 4 bolts. That will be the plate, but then I've got to separate the axle. There's a small crosshead bolt here. Get those out, and then the axles should come out, hopefully without too much resistance, but let's see, we might need a puller on that. It's good news so far. Took out the screws, quick tap with a hammer, and the half shaft's just slid out. That's exposed now. The nut, one of these is reverse thread on the end of the shaft. So to get the hub off, I've got to undo those nuts and then hope the bearing isn't too tight, and that should slide off. And once I've done that, I can get the back plates off. So that's the next job. The back plates are off, and the nuts have been taken off. Interestingly, as I was doing it, I found the left-hand threaded nut had obviously been broken at some point in its life, and at some point somebody has actually welded the nut back up. So I'm gonna have to get some new parts there. So I've undone the bolts now for the differential, taken the differential off. That will be cleaned up separately and inspected. I've cut off the mount on this side, and I'm going to get a replacement mount and weld that onto there. So while I wait for those parts and other parts to arrive, what I'm going to do is degrease the case, put some rust inhibitor on it, and then give it a coat of paint so that is in a position to be reassembled. Progress on the axle. So I've welded 2 patches, one on either side of this stock here. I've covered the axle in some rust preventer that's going off at the moment. I've checked the air breather, just make sure that that's clear, so that just pulls off. I've blown through that hole, so I know that that's clear. And what I've done is ground off the turret on this side. When that comes in, I'll be welding that on. So that's ready for some paint. Meanwhile, over with the hubs, I've taken these apart, just used a socket to smash out the bearing from that side, and then prized the seal out from inside. So I've got a new seal kit and bearing kit to put a new seal and new bearing in there. I'm just going to use the bench vise to push that in. It comes with a new O-ring and a new gasket as well, so once the axles are in, that'll be ready to put on. So the back plates, clean those up, degrease them, so they'll be getting a coat of paint shortly as well, ready for the reassembly. That's the hub bearing pressed in, and the new seal pressed into place as well. I was really lucky with that. Luckily my 48mm socket that I use to undo the hub nut, it's actually imperial but I use 48, is the perfect size for the seal, so it allowed me to press that in. and I used an old bearing then with the bench vise to press in the bearing. So those are ready to go back on now. I've now welded on the plate over the axle and niche that back, as you can see, and I've got my new turret that I've purchased and marked that up, so that will sit perfectly on the top there, and then I'm going to weld that in around here. It doesn't actually take any weight, it's just a holder for the bung here, the stop, the bump stop, and the strap as well. But if the axle comes off, of course, this is the only thing that's going to hold it in place. So I'm going to weld that securely in place, and then we can paint this up and then get on with the rest of the axle. And all welded on now. That's good. So these brackets will slip over here, and then the U-bolts will drop over here. So pleased with that repair. So now I can begin to reassemble the hub back on and the back plates. I'm having a look at the diff now, and I got an interesting problem here. It was leaking a little bit from this top seal, so I wanted to replace that. If you read the forums, it's quite a difficult job because you have to get the pinch just right, and monitor the torque as you undo the nut and so on. But when I came to it, the nut was actually loose, so that gave me an interesting dilemma. So I've marked up so the flange will go back into exactly the same position. I took the decision to put a new seal on anyway, and now I've got to decide what torque to do the nut to. So 140 foot-pounds is in the book, but I'm not convinced I won't damage the diff if I do it to that. So because it was loose before, I'm a bit lost. So I'm going to pick a nominal figure, say 100, and tighten it to that. And I'm sure I'll be revisiting this at some point in the future, but I think that's going to be enough to get me away. And let's see what happens. So nuts torqued up to 100 foot-pounds, and then what I've done is I've used new nuts, screwed the differential back onto the case. No torque listed for this, but found 30 foot-pounds on an internet forum. That seemed to work well. Decided not to paint the diff. I'm going to leave that in its raw state. Then what I've done at the end is slide the shafts back in. New gasket, new O-ring. There's just one screw holding that on at the end there, and then when the brake drum is screwed on, that clamps it even tighter again. So all that remains to do now is get the hammerite and paint up the new trunnion that's been welded on, and then let that dry, and then the axle can go back on the car.